Welcome to this Infosecurity Europe podcast.
I'm Troy Hunt. I am Australian. I'm sure of that bit. In terms of then what I do, it's a little bit of a bunch of different things. So I guess I'm well known for running HaveIBeenPwned, the data breach aggregation service. I used to travel a lot and do conference talks and workshops. Now I stay at home and I do conference talks and workshops. I write a blog. I work with a couple of companies like NordVPN and 1Password for advocacy and board sort of roles. And in terms of what my day looks like, I was kind of thinking about that today. Like I'll get up and I'll work something out, I guess. So, I haven't had a normal job for approaching 6 years now. And the joys of being independent is that I guess you just sort of pick and choose what you want to do, but also that means that it's a little bit unpredictable, but I'm kind of comfortable with the chaos at the moment, I think. HaveIBeenPwned is a data breach aggregation service. I'm just looking at it now because I'm about to load the 500th data breach. I'm just picking which is going to be the lucky 500th at the moment. So on almost 500 occasions now, someone has sent me data, which I've then gone and verified. I've established that it's legitimate. It's usually come from a website that's been breached either via security vulnerability or they've published their database publicly or something along those lines. I get that data, I process it, I load it into an online searchable service, and it is about to, I think with this breach actually, it's going to tick over 10.5 billion individual accounts that are in the service. And it's just kind of everything. It's every sort of organization you can imagine, like little forums, big companies, financial institutions, credit cards, social security data. So it's a fascinating thing that just, even for me, I just, like I get a lot of enjoyment, I think, out of trying to figure out what has gone wrong with this thing. Is it real? What's happening with the data? How can we actually do something useful with it now that a bad thing has happened? And it just keeps ticking over and ticking over. It just passed the 7th birthday and it's still going. I haven't been shut down yet. That's good. So we'll see how long it goes for. I think the exciting thing about my job is that I just never know what's going to happen. Like every day I get up and I've been asleep, which means America's been awake, which is obviously a big chunk of the world, as well as a bunch of Europe, and stuff's happened. And it can just be the most outrageous things that I never expected. A data breach in some egregiously ridiculous IoT device, or someone's just dumped hundreds of millions of records on the dark web, which of course is just the web and it goes everywhere. And now it's in my inbox and my day's about to be written off. So it's just the varied nature of it. So some days I'll get up and there'll be a dozen requests from reporters that want to talk about a new cyber thing that might have nothing to do directly with the things that I do, but apparently I can talk, so that's useful. And it's just never knowing what's going to happen next. And I'm very comfortable with that chaos. I just went crazy in a very predictable, routine corporate job. So yeah, this works for me. Well, the journey to InfoSec was sort of accidental, and I guess I moved laterally from software development. I'm still very much in software development. Every day is some degree of software development because that's how HaveIBeenPwned got built. So my background was I wanted to build software for the internet. And I first saw the internet when I was in university in the mid-90s. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like I want to build websites and things like this. And the timing was good because it was just sort of pre.com and there was a lot of demand, and I went overseas and I had lots of opportunity and things like that. And I just sort of developed a passion for it then. And then as my career progressed, I was working for Pfizer. Everyone knows I used to say everyone knows who Pfizer is because you know what Viagra is, but now it's like everyone knows who Pfizer is because they're making this vaccine. So, good on them for that. But anyway, so I worked there for about 14 years in total. But after, must have been about 6 or 7 years as a developer, they said, if you want your career to progress, you got to stop being a developer. You got to be an architect. So, okay, I guess I want my career to progress. It sounds kind of boring otherwise. But then I really missed software development and I really missed doing stuff hands-on. And I just ended up responsible for managing external organizations, building software. And their approach at the time was software developers are expensive. Let's get rid of them. We will outsource everything to the cheapest possible markets across Southeast Asia. It will be fine. And we got precisely the sort of quality software you would expect if you outsource to the cheapest possible markets across Southeast Asia. So a lot of my job was spent just finding how egregiously bad software was from these vendors. And a lot of that was security vulnerabilities. And I'd find things that in my non-security pro capacity, just as a software developer, were just terrible. And I'd just keep going back to people going, you shouldn't do this, don't do this, don't do that. And I eventually just started turning it into blog posts. And the blog posts resonated because particularly at the time, there really wasn't a lot of good material that was targeted at software developers. A lot of it was for security pros who just, for many reasons, have a very, very different mindset, live in a different world, but not a lot for devs. So that's what I started focusing on, and everything kind of rolled from there. So it was very accidental, but it just resonates well with me. I think the desire to pull things apart and see how they work, to find, maybe there's a little bit of, there's probably a psychological thing about this. It's like finding flaws in other people's things, so that's what kind of drove me in that direction, and the rest is history. To progress in the career ladder, I had to leave a job. Like I had to go independent. And it's just interesting on very many levels to look back at that. And it's I can't sort of sit here and go, if you want to progress, you should leave your job, because it has to be the right person under the right circumstances at the right time. Now, for me, the planets sort of aligned where on the one hand, I was just sick to death of what I was doing. And in fact, I went to leave the job. I've spoken publicly before about the fact that my boss was a pain in the ass. And we had a bit of a disagreement, and I went to HR and I got all the forms to leave. And then I noticed they had to pay me a lot of money if they asked me to leave, because redundancy is a whole different thing. And he'd stopped talking to me, which was good. He was based in Manila, so I never had to bump into him. I was pretty self-sufficient. So I kind of stuck it out. And it was only about 8 or 9 months later where they gave me redundancy. And the joy of the redundancy and the joy of Pfizer's provisioning at the time was I got nearly 2 years worth of pay to go. So it's like, all right, I got buffer. And by then I'd written a bunch of Pluralsight courses as well. So in fact, I made twice as much money per year from Pluralsight, just writing stuff online, than what I did from the job. So in terms of that career progression, what became really easy is that I didn't have financial pressure, and I could literally just walk away from the job and go, okay, well, if my independent life is absolutely abysmal, well, it doesn't matter, because I've got a long runway and I'm making more money than if I was at work just by writing online courses anyway. And then as it turned out, the independent life was exceptionally good. And I never in my wildest dreams could have achieved by any reasonable measure, whether it be notoriety or financial or anything else, I never could have achieved this by staying at that organization. I think even if I had arisen to CTO or something like that, it just would not have happened. So that the path forward for me was to get out of the corporate environment. Now that's not for everyone. There's a whole bunch of risks in doing that, but that's what's worked well for me. I think at the moment, the biggest challenge I face is prioritization. And there are loads and loads of different reasons for that. And they're mostly good reasons, insofar as there's so much stuff that's going on. There's so many different things that I could do. Now, they range from things that are just pure passion projects. So I was talking to my mate Scott Helm a couple of days ago, and we run a website called Why No HTTPS. It's a list of the largest websites for each country that don't default to HTTPS. And I haven't updated it for about a year. And no one's going to pay me to update it. Some people might send me some nice tweets, but I just want to do it because it's just something that I enjoy and I find quite fascinating. And then at the other end of the scale, there are lots of organizations that want to have some sort of commercial relationship, and some of them will pay a lot of money. Kind of balancing up, like, what do I do for fun? What do I do for profit? There's a whole bunch of other things that I could do that will be very beneficial to the community. There's something in particular I want to do with HaveIBeenPwned at the moment that I need to invest time on, and I won't make any money out of it, but it will be really useful for other people and it will do wonderful things. So that the challenge I have, in fact, the way I've often explained it is the challenge is not so much figuring out what to do, but to consciously think about what not to do. Because there are these things here that I want to do, and I've got to literally go, no, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And very often that boils down to something like, this person sent you an email that's interesting, delete it. Like literally just delete it. Because if you get in the discussion, your time's going to be sucked out, and that's not going to be productive for me. Look, I think if thinking about what gets you ahead in the industry, I don't think it's just a personality type, because there are so many different roles that people play that are absolutely essential for a healthy ecosystem. So I'm comfortable being very public and being more extroverted. I certainly wasn't always that way. Other people really want to be left to their own devices and do their own thing and not be in the spotlight. And then there's like everything in between. One of the things that I found worked really well for me, and in fact, this was my very first ever blog post. So I think this was September 2009. And I wrote this blog post called Why Online Identities Are Smart Career Moves. And this was really a hypothesis more than anything, which is that if you go out and you create a public presence for yourself, the things that you've done, the things that you're interested in, the engagements you have, the forum responses, whatever else it may be, but something where other people, potential employers, for example, can look at it later on and go, hey, Troy's really into this stuff. He's been doing this for a long time. He's got some really insightful answers on Stack Overflow and a bunch of open source code, and he's involved in this user group. I found that was absolutely invaluable for me, and it was almost a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy writing that blog post in the first place. But I wrote it, and I said in the blog post, actually, I was hiring people at the time, and someone had come to me and they'd give me a CV, and the CV, all the CVs are wonderful. Everyone is so great in their CV. They'd all go like, hey, I'm amazing. Look at all these things. And you go, yeah, like I know you say you are because it's your CV, but how do I establish that? And then I distinctly remember they go, well, I've got references. You could call my references. I'm like, but you chose the references. You're only going to choose people who are going to say nice things about you. So that's no good either. So basically, there is no independent way of me getting a greater degree of confidence in who you are, because interview situations are always high pressure. No one performs well there. There's all sorts of coding assessments and things like that. A bunch of them are super weird, and they really only show one part of the person's personality. I would love to be able to go and find, even if it was just 12 months, someone junior, I'd love to go and find 12 months of you on forums writing some code. I'd like to see 12 months of your Twitter profile and who you engage with. And not just the topics that you discuss, but how you discuss them. Like, are you a total dick? Now, you're going to tell me you're not, because who would, say otherwise? But I would like to see your engagements and how you communicate with people, especially people you don't agree with. So I think having that online identity for me has just been absolute gold. And mind you, it took many, many, many years for it to be valuable. But for anyone, I think even in the very, very early days, it's extremely useful. I think the situation of the pandemic is that it's massively different for different people. Obviously for many people, it's meant loss of job, loss of livelihood. It's been enormously stressful. For other people, it has been the best time of their lives. For me personally, I'm probably more towards the latter. And if I look at, let's say if I look at 2020 as a year, it was financially much better than any other year, in a large part because I still ended up doing all the conference talks and workshops and things after a little bit of a shaky period where people are like, what are we going to do? Yes or no? And sort of everyone kind of figured out, I think, by the middle of the year, and they're like, okay, I guess this is life now. Let's just go and do these things. And I could do more stuff because I wasn't traveling jet lag between places. So that was fantastic for me. I think for people in the technology industry in general, and this is my own very subjective view, I think for the most part, they're going to do better than most other people because they already live in a world where pretty much their entire life and productivity is at a keyboard. And we've been pushing for things like the ability to work from home for a very long time. We're probably more introverted by nature in the first place. So I think people are sort of really carving themselves out an ability to be very effective remote workers in this industry. And I kind of love the fact that organizations were forced by government decree to do this. I'm sure there are so many people, just like what I was when I was working back in corporate world, who are just constantly like, look, I'm really productive at home. Please save me all the travel time. Let me work from home. And I just imagine the boss, like my old boss, going, well, you need to be visible. So, screw you. Like, okay, now you don't have a choice. You literally have to be from home. And many of the stories I've heard, just anecdotally from organizations, is it's working very, very well, either having their employees from home or doing things like running conferences and training remotely as well. It's an interesting question around whether that gives people perhaps a little bit more flexibility to migrate through roles as well. And not having given it much thought in advance, the things that come immediately to mind is that you would expect that the friction of change would be lower. You don't have to get welcomed to a new desk in a new place. It's like, well, it's the same desk. It's, for many people, it's not the one in my bedroom. So that stays the same. I think the ability to sort of sit in that one location and market yourself around, where we've now got an environment which either at present for many people is mandated, where you just don't have the option to move around, or for many others, as they start getting that choice again, organisations have now made the investment and seen the return on remote working. So you kind of hope that a person, let's say for me on the Gold Coast, if I was in a corporate job, instead of me having to find somewhere on the Gold Coast or doing the 1 hour drive every day to Brisbane, maybe I could work for a company in Sydney or Melbourne, which at least for half the year are on the same time zone and the other half of the year only an hour off. Surely that would have to give people a lot more options than before. And I think this is probably one of the best possible industries to be in to take advantage of that. I think this idea of how we attract the next generation is interesting. And I guess it's a question of what would prohibit that. I mean, one of the things that comes immediately to mind is that we know we need a lot more inclusiveness. And I think that, in fact, we know that technology in general is a very male-dominated industry. There's a lot of women in particular that feel excluded by that. And I always find that InfoSec almost seems to be like this one slice of technology which just amplifies so many of the deficiencies that we have in technology as a generalization. I think there's much less representation of genders in InfoSec. There's much more introverted behavior. There's much more, in my experience at least, obnoxious behavior. So I think there's a lot that we need to do better to make it an environment that people of all backgrounds want to be in. Now, does that get easier in an era where we're starting to spend more time at home and less time face to face, and everyone's just a person behind a keyboard? Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say. But I sort of hope that this is an opportunity for us to sort of move beyond some of those barriers, which at least I've heard from people is making them reticent to be a part of the industry. I think the next big thing that's not going to happen in InfoSec is we're not going to get rid of passwords, because normally that's the question, right? It's like, will the next big thing be there'll be no more passwords? No. So it's not that. I think for the most part, this industry, like many, work much more incrementally than just having a next big thing. And I see lots of things which are significant, but I don't think fundamentally change the face of the industry. We see a lot of IoT. IoT is a massive thing in the industry now because everything's getting internet, and of course everyone's screwing that up. So that's a big security thing. This sort of zero trust principle is becoming very big now. Everyone's sort of becoming aware that you just can't trust anything and we've got to expect everything's going to be bad. So there's that. I was joking about the password thing, but I think the alternate authentication schemes are also becoming a really big thing. So that's interesting. And then on the adversarial side, we're seeing, I feel like it's almost less scruples on behalf of nefarious parties. I think of things like that situation in Finland a few months ago, where a psychotherapy department had all the data stolen, and attackers started literally ransoming off and blackmailing the individuals based on their psychotherapy files. Like it just feels like it's maybe because they've fallen upon hard times because of COVID, they're getting more desperate. I don't think that's a very good excuse, who knows? But it almost feels like that there is more fair game on behalf of the attackers than what there was before. And then, of course, the other big thing that's becoming super massive is the whole nation state aspect as well. The SolarWinds thing recently was a really, really good example of how sophisticated that's becoming. But I struggle to think of one thing that's going to be either the watershed moment or the next big thing. So it's a good question around inspirational figures. I think there's been a lot of different influences. Mikko Hyppinen's someone that I've always really looked up to. And one of the reasons I always looked up to Mikko a lot is the way he presents and his style. I always liked it because he'd talk and then he'd have these long pauses. And like, what's he going to do next? What's happening? Why is he taking so long to pause? And it's just like dramatic effect. So I've gotten to know Mikko quite well in more recent years, which has been really good, and that's been interesting. I guess, other really notable industry people like Kevin Mitnick. There's a bunch of his books there. And yeah, every now and then we now catch up. And it was only 2 days ago, he messaged me. He's like, hey, I'm in town. So I was like, okay, cool. We can catch up at dinner. And it's really nice that now we sort of get to this point where people that inspired me to shape my career are people that I can spend time with. And, I hope there are other people in the future who you ask the same question to and they say it's me, and we get to catch up and do something nice together. So yeah, I think they're very big. And I guess even before that, like I always found Bill Gates really inspirational, just because of how much was built from nothing. And of course, since then, there's been other really noteworthy figures. But, I'm thinking now, even like the mid-90s when I started getting involved in tech. No, I was talking about Zuckerberg back then, or even Bezos or the sort of .com era. So yeah, Gates was always a massive one. And I guess with the passage of time, we're sort of seeing a very different side to him in terms of his altruism as well, which is really nice. So yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to have like $70 billion to throw around. But if I did, I'd do what Bill does. That'd be nice.
Thank you for listening to this Infosecurity Europe podcast.